Welcome to the 2-month review, the only books podcast with what is considered the worst possible angle to broadcast from. This is Chad Post from Open Letter Books, and I'm joined as always by Kaya Stramanis, editorial director at Open Letter and translator from the Latvian. This is, if you're tuning in for the first time, a weekly broadcast brought to you by Open Letter and 3% and the University of Rochester, in which we go over one big book, break it down bit by bit, section by section, talk about it, analyze it, have a good time. We are doing Lanark by Alistair Gray, and we are covering the end of book 3 today, the prologue, and the first chapter of book 1. So we'll get into that in a second. But Kaya, how are you doing?
Just making sure that everyone understands that there are boobs on this book. I am doing well. Feeling a little emotional after kindergarten graduation this morning, but otherwise okay. How are you, Chad?
I am flustered. My computer won't turn on, so I'm recording this for anyone who's watching or like now or later and seeing this on YouTube. The angle that we have is because my iPad is the only way that I can access this. For whatever reason, my computer won't turn on. A very common 2-month review technical difficulty moment. However, I can't figure out how to get this iPad to not be staring up my nose. So this will be great.
You're like a kindergarten teacher. You have to do from the top down so your forehead looks gigantic.
The problem is that
the kindergarten teacher angle.
Like, the problem is that when I have to move to look at the book, it's going to all fall apart. So anyways, I think we should just kind of jump right into this. This will probably be a shorter episode than usual. Brian couldn't make it this week, but the two of us can talk about it and get through what's going on in here.
Mm-hmm.
I think that there's kind of three distinct sections to talk about. But before we get into that, I do also want to say that last week we forgot to announce who won our contest. So at the end of last season, the end of the Praiseworthy season, we had a draft in which we each chose 5 former 2-month review titles to put together for a 2-month review class. And people voted on SurveyMonkey, they voted on Instagram, they voted on Twitter. All the various polls were added together, and the winner was Brian with Let the Bodies Hit the Floor, which included, I forget which books right now, and I'm not going to look it up, but
not even here to brag, not even here to accept bragging rights.
Yep. Might as well tell me you didn't win. You were a very close second. You lost by 2 votes. I was a distant third. So nobody wanted to come to Laying Brick, the big book class that I put together. But Dismal Lady stuff, fared quite well, which is good to know.
People love a dismal lady.
But people also love letting the bodies hit the floor.
Mm-hmm.
So there is that. So Brian won.
Speaking of dismal ladies, this section for this week.
Nice.
Dismal lady all over the place.
That's a pretty solid segue. Yeah. So do you want to were catching up last week, and
I was catching up last night.
Well, you are now. You have read through the entire part that we're talking about.
Yep.
So, why don't you? Since last week we kind of talked around, and you're still some pages behind, so we didn't go too far in detail into the parts that you hadn't read yet. But now that you've read the first 129 pages, what is your general impression, top level? Where are you feeling? Where are you at on this? Because it sounded like from last night you had some mixed feelings.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm enjoying it. I'm interested to see. I don't know. I'm enjoying it. You were saying that this section for this week read, according to you, quote, reads quickly and is quite funny or is just funny. There were a few lines for me here and there that I thought were funny, but I thought it was quite, I wouldn't say somber, but I don't think it was funny. I thought it, unless it's supposed to be satirical, I thought it was a pretty, I don't know, the words escaping me, but I guess somber or very emotive section.
Yeah, I agree. Well, I think that there's a couple of things. So talking about book 3, let's talk about book 3 first. So for anyone who's tuning in again, I don't know why you would jump in on episode 2 on a book and just
why would you do that
roll in. Why would you jump in on this at all, to be honest? But
stop and go back and listen to the last one.
Yeah, so you could listen to the last one, but the book Lanark is organized where it goes book 3, prologue, book 1, 2, 4, epilogue. So there is the structure is out of order. So we jump in media res with a character who goes by the name of Lanark, who is in a town that has sunlight for only like a couple hours a day. It's always gray. It's always overcast. It's kind of bizarre. He doesn't really have a past. He doesn't remember his past. He does write like what he does remember, which is coming to town, meeting Gloopy, who I still envision as Dobby. Every time his name comes up, I just picture Dobby from Harry Potter. But Gloopy, who like leads him to a welfare office where he gets some money. He goes and finds a boarding house. He meets a woman who then at the welfare place, who then is his neighbor, who goes missing and leaving behind her 3 kids. Then he ends up going missing essentially too by diving in a cemetery, going through a mouth into what is referred to as the Institute, which is underground and is a place where they supposedly heal you from your dragons, whatever it's called, dragon
skin, or like they just start calling it like a sickness or not an affliction, but they stop referring to it as dragon skin. But there are various afflictions that they are purportedly healing people of.
Right. But one of the big ones is this dragon. It had another name to it, but this dragon skin where his arm has become all scaly and dragon-like. And then he gets there and he is quote unquote cured of that. And then as such, he becomes a doctor. And as a doctor, he's assigned a patient. He keeps saying that he wants to leave. And they're like, the only way you can leave is if there's someone else who wants to leave with you. And you two can then escape. But like, it's not going to be better out there. It's not better than it is in the Institute. And so he's assigned to work with this person who's become full dragon and to try out a therapy on them. Various therapies that have been tried are listed in here, such as the last one is music. And apparently this is a female dragon. I don't remember why we know that, except that in the end she is a female. But I
think they tell him, they're like,
they do. Okay.
Patient. She is like, patient 1.
Yeah. So so the person who tried carrying her before Lanark played classical music and tried to get through to her underneath this dragon barrier through music. And she's like, that was boring and sucked. And he's like, well, let's talk. She's like, fuck talking. And then she's like, why don't you read to me? So he finds a book and reads to her. And she's obsessed with this book. Eventually, she is about to go full salamander, as they call it.
I love that expression.
Funny, very funny. And he stays in the area with her, even though they're like, she's going to explode salamander times. And she does. But what happens is all of the scales fall off and there's a woman underneath. And
it's Rima.
And it's Rima, supposedly. I don't know that that's actually face value. I think he's calling her Rima. I think that I don't know if it is the same person that was Rima before, but it's someone who's like essentially representing that. And Rima was someone that he had been sort of like flirting with and a quasi near relationship with.
Right. And this person also, I mean, in any way, this person, whether or not she is Rima, is connected to him because she refers to him as Thaw. And basically like, oh, are you like, hello, Thaw, like, are you back to pull the same bullshit that you pulled before?
Which is interesting. So let's put a pin in that for a second. We do get some other information from this institute. One is that the name of the town that he was in was called Unthank, which I referenced last week, but I didn't realize hadn't been in the text itself until now. But they tell you that it's Unthank. There's like, they're underground. There's also like they're eating this weird food that's super nutritious but sounds gelatinous and gross. Sounds like some Latvian cooking for you, like some wet meat. And it turns out
elastic ice, I believe is what he calls it, or at one point. Yeah.
Gross.
So gross.
And then it turns out, yeah, you go.
No,
turns out that it's supposedly made from patients. They sacrifice themselves to be made into gelatinous cubes that feed everyone. This is why they have food within the institute. So after Rima is saved or cured or temporarily cured, she needs a lot of food. She's like dead tired, like, exhausted, and he won't eat it. Becomes a whole problem, which I want to talk about that too, is like where this book turns into metaphor and lots of various metaphors. But then they get saved by getting like all the special cheeses and whatnot. And
from a very depressed monk or priest, whatever he is.
Yeah. Who does keep saying, so the depressed priest, what is it, Nopes?
Yeah.
Noakes comes in and is like, okay, guys, you know, I'll give you some real food. Here's some cheese. Here's some like bread. I forget what he gives her. He's like, the only thing is, when you leave, you have to tell everyone to not come here. And Lanark's like, well, I can't really do that. You know, I'll tell people that I didn't really like my experience in the Institute, you know, as it comes up in conversation. He's like, no, it's your job to tell everyone that they're not to come to the Institute. And then it's like, but why? You know, it seems like cure people. It's like, fine, then tell everyone to come to the Institute. Let's all be in the institution.
But tell them to come willingly.
Tell them to come willingly.
Mm-hmm.
And so then the book 3 wraps up with Lanark essentially talking to an oracle and saying, can you tell me who I was? And the oracle starts telling the story that begins, which is also going to be the beginning of book 3. It begins with like, Duncan Thaw drew a blue line on top of a page and a brown line at the bottom. Where is it?
Page 121.
120. Oh, yeah. Oh, well, yeah. So, but the oracle starts this too. It's like, Duncan Thaw drew a blue line along the top of a sheet of paper and a brown line along the bottom. He drew a giant with a captured princess running along the brown line, and says he couldn't draw the princess lovely enough. He showed the giant holding a sack. The princess was in the sack. And so then Lanark's like, dude, but who are you? And like, why are you going back to all this detail? And the oracle then is going to tell its story in Prologue. But that's where we are with book 3. So now I was looking back at like what I thought was kind of funny, and the ones that I had marked were some of the stuff where it's just like kind of like side observational references or like bits where like on page 80 to 83 there's a bit where he's reading the story. He's like he starts reading to Rima when she's in dragon form, and one book is called like The Holy War, and he starts reading that and she's like, I'm not listening to these lies, like this is stupid. And he's like, okay, let's try something else. And he starts reading this one that's like in Scottish dialect that's like, here's a story of a small boy named Willie. And like, it's like really goofy. And she's like, is this meant to be entertaining? It's just like those sorts of bits I think are quite funny. And there's a number of them that I marked just like next to it. And some things that I just like are kind of like joke, but not like, they're like humorous, but not like big joke telling type things. So to me, it was funnier than the first one, which seems very like Kafka-esque and like that sort of like near claustrophobic vibe that some of those books can have. And this part was like a little bit more like kind of goofy. Like there's a dragon, they're going to turn into a salamander. The guy's recording his like screeching cello music that he thinks will cure people. And like, it's all like a little bit more madcap-y, or it feels like a little bit more like on that vibe than the first section did when we read this. So that's what I meant.
Okay. Yeah, no, I think that there are some funny parts, and I also similarly have, you know, marked LOLs in the margins. But it's on page 83 for me where he starts to read the No Orchids for Miss Blandish, and she's like, "Oh, I like this book. Like Crazy Hopes of Glamorous, Rich, Colorful Life, and then Abduction, Rape, Slavery. That book at least is true." And he's like, no, it's not. It's male sex fantasy. And she's like, well, that's basically what life is, my friend. Like he's like, it's fiction. And she's like, but it's not. Like, this is how women live. And that's where it gets bleak is the word that I meant, not somber. And then he's like trying to mansplain, like, not fiction, but like mansplain it to her. And at the end, and that's what I thought was funny, at the end of chapter 9, at the bottom of 83, she's just like he gets really mad and he starts shouting and then he goes quiet and then she's like, just like, go on reading. She's basically like, she's just like, just shut up, man.
Yeah, I have that whole section underlined too, where she's like, this book at least is true. And he's like, it's not true. It's a male sex fantasy. And she says, and life for most women is just like that, a performance in the male sex fantasy. The stupid ones don't notice. They've been trained for it since they were babies, so they're happy. And of course, the writer of the book made things obvious by speeding them up. What happens to the Blandish girl in a few weeks takes us a lifetime for the rest of us. And then I just wrote, oh boy, and underlined it in the margins for his response, where he says, I deny that, said Lanark fiercely. I deny that life is more of a trap for women than men. I know that most women have to go work at home because people grow in them, but working at home is more like freedom than working in offices and factories.
Oh my God. And then she's like,
that's nope, don't say that. That's nope. absolutely not.
No, we don't say that. And that's why I love that she's like, just go on reading. She's like, just stop.
Just get out of here.
Yeah.
So one of the things I want to ask about though, related to that, is that throughout this last week and here, there are like at least 4, I believe, mentions of freedom, where he's like, "Oh, well, that's what freedom is," and they're like, "What's freedom?" And he gives like a definition to it, and they're all like kind of partial and like incomplete in various ways, or like not really like truly what freedom is. But this is like a huge motif here that keeps popping up. Is like, what is freedom?
It's what his ultimate goal is.
Yeah, his goal is to be free, to get freedom. But like when they're like, "What do you mean by freedom?"
Yeah,
he's just like, "I don't know, like whatever." So, for example, on 74, there he's like, I'm just here. All I want is freedom. And there's a metallic rattle of laughter. Lanark said, "Yes, it's a comic word. We're all forced to define it in ways that make no sense to other people. But for me, freedom is," he thought for a while, "life in a city near a sea or near the mountains where the sun shines for an average of half the day." It goes on these weird specificities. "My house would have a living room, big kitchen, bathroom, and 1 bedroom for each of the family. And my work would be so engrossing that while I did it, I would neither notice nor care if I was happy or sad. Perhaps I would be an official who kept useful services working properly, or a designer of houses and roads for a city where I lived. When I grew old, I would buy a cottage on an island or among the mountains. Dirty, 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 dirty." The voice of the low throb of rage. So it's like, that's what I'm saying. Like, for me, it's kind of funny because even that part is like, what is freedom? He's like, like sun half of the day, like sun half of the day in a house,
like the capitalist dream, and she's just like that.
Although the line about like my work being so engrossing, it almost feels like part of a communist manifesto. Like, teach their own, that like it would be like work wouldn't be work would be joy of your contribution, sort of vibe. But the other thing that I wanted to ask, so like this book, this whole first section, book 3, is like, we've talked about the Kafkaesque nature of it, but it does read like a metaphor, which is kind of like the Kafka trap of like, what is this a metaphor for? Like, it's sometimes referred to as like, I think that Unthank.
Love you, Daddy.
Love you too, buddy. I think Unthank was referenced in like a book review. Isn't it in the beginning? Isn't it in the preface that William Boyd's like, "Oh, I referenced Unthank as being a representation of Edinburgh," and people are like, "It is not." And like Gray was like, "No, that's really what it was. It was like Glasgow and Edinburgh." I forget how this.
Yeah, I don't remember which way it goes, but I don't think it's that. Like, I don't know. There are times in the book where it explicitly mentions Glasgow. So like, I'm like, I don't understand what the confusion is. Like, I also don't know. I also don't feel like it matters. At least it doesn't matter to me. But
I don't think it does either. But like, it is like this dirty, dusty, like dark place. So on that level, there's like some sort of like, I think, a metaphor for like modern life in one of those cities, in those big cities, and like the sort of like dismal nature of that. However, where it talks about the Institute, I had two thoughts, and I'll just throw those out here and see what you think. One is, the Institute does feel like a mental hospital or a jail where people are being treated. And that's where they're kind of like, you have to be here to get healed. And once you're healed, you can heal others. Like that sort of like metaphor for like treatment of that sort. Like if you're mentally, if we figure out that speech therapy works for you, or music therapy works for you, or whatever works for you, then you can be cured and you can go forth. And the cure, or the illness, is people are closed off and they're no longer, they're inhuman.
Yeah.
Like they have, the dragon skin takes them over. They become callous. They become like scabbed over. They become like a shell around themselves, and they can't communicate right. And then they find the thing that breaks through, and then they become transformed back into being human with none of those things, which seems like a pretty like maybe spot on sort of metaphor, but is like kind of a representative of like the mental health like program of like that's kind of the point, is like making you authentic and you, and not having these like growths all over your being.
Yes. And also I would go a little farther with that and say that I think it's also for like the lemming effect of healthcare and addressing health issues, because they're like, oh, just like, take off your clothes and come head first. And then when the first time that Monsignor Noakes goes in to talk to him, and he's like, just promise me the one thing if you can do for me is tell people on the outside to stay away from here. And I can't find it now, but he's like, just tell them like all they need is like a little bit of more hope. Just wait a little bit more. Like you don't need the institute. You can do it yourself.
Yep.
You just need to like have a little bit more patience.
So it's on page 81. And there's the two versions. Okay, so this is backing up just one bit because this ties into it. So Ozaphant was a very difficult case. So this is Noakes is talking about Ozaphant, who's like the kind of like the boss man of Lanark. Ozaphant was a very difficult case, half leech, half dragon. Nowadays he pretends he was pure dragon. I know otherwise. I believe that the mass had cured him in my prayers and sermons, but it was the music. I want music we had in those days. Then they go on, and he's like, but he's talking about like he comes from like a religious background, that the religion was the saving part of this. And he's like, and now everything's all screwed up. All these professors and artists and heads of departments have become powerful by tearing tiny bits off of the religion which cured them and developing these bits into religions of their own. No God unites them now, only mutual assistance pacts based on greed. And then Lanark's like, I'm new here. I don't understand you. Just like another one of the funny lines. But then Noakes goes on to say, like, tell people not to come here. It's on 81. Tell them they must not enter this institute. A little more faith and hope and charity, and they can cure their own diseases. Charity alone will save them, if it is possible without the others. And so he is like, you can save yourself. We don't need this treatment, which I think also like that metaphor becomes interesting and qualified by the fact that they're in this institute being cured by eating the people who didn't make it, that are uncured. Those become the people who don't get saved, become the fuel for the people who then do get saved.
And it also runs the institute, like it's the fuel for everything.
Bam, for a second, I need to get a plug.
Okay. So it does, like, it talks about, I'm trying to riff by myself, but it talks about how, when the food is made from the people who are not cured, it's also used to fuel the institute and to make the parts that run the institute. So, I mean, I don't even know which way this metaphor is going. You can almost like pick and choose if it's like separation of church and state. Is it like modern medicine versus religion? Is it like like we can build our success off the broken backs of others? Like, it's just, I don't know. I agree that there's a metaphor, and maybe that's the reason why I don't like, I'm enjoying reading this book, but I don't know how I feel about it because I'm not quite, other than the Dismal Lady stuff, I'm not quite latching on to an idea yet.
Right. I agree with that for sure. The other thing is like there's the larger scale descriptions of the institute in which like there is a wind that blows you along like with the current, and you like, and it's very specific, like you lean forward, you stay, the current moves you faster, but you don't fall over. But if you like were to lean back, you just topple into the if you lean into the wind. So it's like you have to go in one direction. You have to go through this way. All this, everything's this way, which is interesting within that kind of scope too. There is then, let's talk about thought.
Is that communism or socialism?
Yeah. Or is it a machine? Is it like Metropolis? I think of like the movie, oh my God, what's the guy's name? Super famous filmmaker that made Metropolis, where like they're constantly doing like these hand things for these clocks, and like the machinery all has to be working. Like this feels like a little bit of that machinery, which is also sort of Kafkaesque. Now, like let me see. There's another ones that I mark here. I think we've kind of gone through it of the main pieces, but so that's kind of like the plot of it. And I think you're like there's a metaphor. The other metaphor that came to mind though is that instead of like a mental institute, it's a jail, and that this is all like a trap. And that's why he's like, don't send anyone here. If they do come willingly. That feels like a mental health thing. But then when there's on page 88, this is from the dragon, from what's her name, right? Yes, Rima. She says, "Oh, I know you, Thaw. I know all about you. The hysterical child, the eager adolescent, the mad rapist, the wise old daddy. Oh, I've suffered all your tricks and know how hollow they are, so don't weep. Don't dare to weep. Grief is the rottenest trick of all. And then Lanark was too disturbed to feel the tears on his face. He said, you don't know me. I'm not called Thaw. I've been none of those things. And something commonplace that keeps getting hurt. I'm something commonplace that keeps getting hurt. And then it comes up again later where she ponders, says, yes, I dreamed a lot of strange things in that armor. You were called Thaw or Coulter, and we stood on a bridge at night with the moon above us and an old man watching from among some trees. You wanted to kill me. I don't remember the rest. And then he says, I wonder how I could discover more. And then they call Monroe. He ends up being hooked up with this oracle, who then, not to jump ahead, but basically the oracle, he asked the oracle, like, can you tell me who I was? Like what, what my story is, where I came from. Tell me about my past. Could you tell me about my past, please, starting with childhood? The voice said, I'm very keen on this kind of work, but you'll have to give me a clue. Have you anything belonging to that past? And then he's like, oh, he finds like a fluted cockle and a quartz pebble with gray and cream veins through it. He said, I found a seashell and a stone. Hold one in each hand. Yes, I can see the way backwards now. You were called Thaw. Will I start the story when you're 5, 5, or 15, or 10? He said 5, please. It starts with a drawing. And then he's like, so the Lanark laid uncomfortably, and the oracle, in the voice of a precocious child, said, Duncan Thaw made a blue line along the top of a paper and a brown line at the bottom. He drew a giant running along the brown line with a captured princess, but he couldn't draw the princess beautiful enough. He made the giant carry a sack. The princess was inside it. His father, excuse me, said Lanark, that's a very abrupt beginning. Do not start by telling me something of the geographical and social surroundings, which again, super funny. So then he's going to go back and tell his story. Now, the thing I bring that up for is like the Thaw thing seems like obvious foreshadowing, because Duncan Thaw is the character. That's the rest of the books 1 and 2.
Yeah.
And I assume will end up maybe raping and murdering someone? Question mark. At least that's planted there. As like, and that's come up twice. Like there's the other point when he's dancing at Gloopy's party, and the woman's like, "You killed me, like you murdered me."
No, he said that. He's like, I killed you before, didn't I?
Right.
And then
that's right.
But it does also on 163. Oh no, sorry, 103, where the oracle starts in and is like, okay, you showed up in Unthank. You're registered as a dragon. You got some money. You were delivered in human form. You're given to Professor Ozaphant. Your talent was, I don't know how to pronounce that, vitiated or vitiated by acts of aimless violence.
Right.
And that seems kind of like a throwaway, because not a throwaway, but it's like just in there. And I don't think he was particularly violent since he got to the Institute. But yeah, so the violence thing comes up. So I think that is like going to your point of foreshadowing. And my mind is wandering a little, but I want to put a pin and at least go back to the specialist, the catalyst woman.
Yes.
Because I think that is very interesting.
Okay, let's talk about her, because there's her, and there's also one other part related to that, is that it ends the oracle's part where he's like, this is what you are. Here's your blah, 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 blah. Your talent was vitiated by acts of aimless violence. On the 85th, you interrupted a recording session, insulted the catalyst, blocked the current, and shattered a viewing lens. Your relocation is scheduled for the 88th, subject to confirmation by Lord Monbodo, director of the Institute, moderator of the expansion project, and president of the council. Now, Lord Monbodo comes up 2 or 3 times in here. Again, not defined, just like seemingly almost like a shadowy big bad of sorts, like the Wizard of Oz sort of scene. The one that's like in control is Lord Monbodo, which is a wonderful name.
Great.
So the catalyst. Talk about the catalyst.
The catalyst. I think the catalyst was meant to like throw him off or deter him from leaving, first of all. But the thing that I found unsettling is that on page 91, she's like, how should I look? And she keeps asking him, like, how should I look? How do you want me to be? And then, but you have to keep your eyes open. And she says, you must look at me. I go blank when I'm not watched. And that seems like a very weird robotic, like that is a male fantasy where she's like, how should I look? Do you like it? But so like, she needs like he needs to be looking at her in order for her to reflect what he wants to see in this woman, in this sexual partner, or else she just goes dead. So it's kind of like, and it was very unsettling to me, but she also does get mad when he goes away. So I don't know. I don't think she actually wants to leave because she doesn't seem, I don't know. She just unsettles me. What did you think?
Yeah, because she is the one that like he meets her and she's like, "Well, I want to leave. We can go
Yeah,
together." And
it
then
seems
like
very planted to me.
they don't. But what's funny is like that one of my favorite lines, sticking with the one from last week, as on 90, which I was just open to. They stood together and she led the way out, Lanark walking awkwardly because of the pressure of his penis against his trousers, which is a great like technical way of describing an erection.
Yes.
And like yeah, so he meets her in the bit, in the dining hall, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And then he says, I do hate it. I hate you don't hate this place if you can say that. He says, I do hate it. I'm leaving when I can find a companion. She looked up. I'll go with you. I want to leave too. Lanark was confused. He said, well, thank you, but I have a patient, not a very hopeful case, but I can't leave until I've definitively or definitely cured her or failed. She said disgustingly, you know nobody is ever cured, that the treatment only keeps the bodies fresh until we need fuel for food or clothes or food.
And that's where he finds out.
Yes, and that's where he finds out about the food part, and then
So
goes
maybe
to
she's
her room.
plant.
So, but I don't know. I feel like I had this gut sense that some of these characters that are here are going to be reflected in the book one and book two, and that like who she is within his life will become clear via who she was prior to him getting into Unthink and the Institute. As if these two things are running parallel, but they are supposed to, according to the interview with Alistair Gray, he's like, oh, this book is completely logicless. Ages 5 to 20, 20 to 30, 31 to 38, 40
Yeah.
onwards. It's like, he's like, each book is just the ages of the character. But they get the sense that there's like, sort of like through the looking glass, all of a sudden these people are something different than what they were.
Absolutely.
But yeah, that one was really intriguing to me as well, and was one of the other things I marked. But I think it's curious that we start there and we leave there. The other thing I was going to say, and we can move on to the prologue and book one, is that this book keeps having people telling things from the past in a way that like the present, it's almost not a fugue, but it does play around with what the present time is. So he's in the present in this is, going through his life in Unthink and going to go end up in the Institute. But along the way, remember last week, they're like, well, write down, you should be a writer. Like you're an artist, like you can be a writer. And so he writes what happened to him when he got to town up until where we were. So like he arrives on the bus and then it goes through into like, okay, now he's at this boarding hall. Then we get to this part and he's like, well, who was I before I got to Unthink? And the Oracle's like, oh, I'll tell you, starting at the age of 5. And so even with book 1 and 2 embedded within there, we're theoretically going back to that. And the Oracle is dictating or documenting books 1 and 2, leading up to where he gets to in the beginning of book 3, being on this train, right? And then before the Oracle can do that, though, the Oracle has to tell its own story and go back to like how it became an Oracle, in which it's like a disembodied voice, but maybe also kind of a body. Like it's in this like intermediary phase that almost represents like the author themselves, like Alistair Gray to some degree, of like the person who's like kind of inventing and telling what everyone's deal is, and is also there but not there, is like not corporeal but is like the one who has the information.
Someone who has dissociated so ferociously that they just exist in a state of non-existence.
Yes. And there's good shit in this like prologue. I think there's some really good, amazing things.
There are. You see the running headers.
The running headers are great. That's where the title comes from. Can he help Lanark out of hell? It's from the last page of the prologue. It's really like kind of philosophical, and also again like philosophical and like kind of that metaphysical sort of explaining how people are, explaining the world in these big chunks. And he then basically the person who's here, the Oracle, in his initial life, he becomes obsessed first of all with numbers, which I think is fascinating because I love, as someone who loves numbers, he's like, numbers are always the same. Like what it is in your head is the same as what it is outside of your head. But you think about your best friend and you're like, I know this person, but the person in your head is not the person that they are in real life. So like all that stuff is like nonsense. Like the only thing that's real are numbers. The experience shows us that the idea of a man is only slightly like him. And then he goes on with that, like, it puzzles me that the people who live by owning or managing big sums of money are commonly called materialistic. For finance is the most purely intellectual, the most sheerly spiritual of activities, being concerned less with material objects than with values. So it becomes like this, like, hedge fund bro in many ways, and like kind of doubles down on that, where like he's like, when I was 35, when I became really wealthy, but long before I was living at a service flat, driving a Humber, playing golf at weekends and bridge in the evenings. And so he's like bragging about his wealth, and he's basically like, I'm not like other people. These things, how does it go? My acquaintances lived like myself in the world of numbers rather than the muddle of seeable, touchable things which used to be called reality. But they had wives, which meant that they grew richer as they're meant that as they grew richer, they had to move into bigger houses and buy new cars and reproduction antique cocktail cabinets. These things naturally occurred in their conversation, but I also heard them gloat on other objects with an enthusiasm which seemed greater than the more useless the object was. Quote, I see the daffodils are with us again, they would say, or, my God, Harrison has shaved his mustache off. Where I saw a leaf, they saw a lovely green leaf. Where I saw a new power station, and they saw technological progress or industry ravaging the countryside. Once at a party, a couple started fighting. I was explaining something to a client, and the noise made me raise my voice. But the other guests were greatly excited and began whispering and spitting adjectives. Disgraceful, pathetic, ludicrous, distressing, inconsiderate. I saw that most people had excessive funds of emotion, which they got rid of by investing in objects that they could not use. Which I think that's like that's where it's like sort of like nails down like humanity in some lines.
Yes.
Which is great. The other one that I want to say is like, yes, like what he says, like he starts like going to work. Things only exist within his work. Nobody sees him. He doesn't interact with anyone. He's starting to become less and less corporeal. He says, I had become bodiless in a bodiless world. I existed as a series of thoughts amidst infinite grayness, which is essentially the singularity. Like this book is like, this is the Elon Musk and Peter Thiels of the world trying to find a way to exist within the net without having to have a body, just a series of these algorithmic, data-driven thoughts. Like this book, it's essentially postulating like the singularity.
Has Rodrigo Frazan read this book?
I don't know. I'm certain he's read everything. I'll ask him, but I'm certain, and I can't imagine that he hasn't. That goes for like almost every single book that I can think of. But yeah, so he tells his backstory and why he's like now in this weird world, and then he goes on to start telling the Duncan Thaw story, where he's like, okay, now I've told you about me. My line of the week is in this middle part, so I'm going to save it. But like he then says, I've told you about me, so now I'll tell you about Duncan Thaw. So what do you have? But what was your take on this prologue? I think this was one of the ones where you're like, I'm still not sure I get this.
No, it's not about getting it. It's just like I don't know. I'm not latching on to anything. I thought the prologue was interesting. I mean, it does get into that like Rodrigo Frazan-esque, CERN Hadron Collider aspect. Yeah, it was just, I mean, I don't know. Other than that, for me, it was just a bridge between book 1 and book 3. I mean, it's a prologue. Like it worked as a nice bridge.
Yeah. I can see that, and like that is more or less like its functionality there. Yeah. I'm just curious, like about.
I don't have a whole lot else to say, I guess. The thing that's not interesting, but one thing that anytime I see the word oracle, the thing I immediately think of is in the movie 300, there are oracles at the top of this like mountain, and they are these disgusting beings. Like they are people, but they like bring this bring this, I assume, virgin up to them because that's how they do their like soothsaying or oracling, and they essentially like I think it sets up that they basically like rape her, sexually assault her, and that's how they like do their thing. And that's the first thing I always think of when I see the word oracle, is that imagery of these like disgusting mountain, gross, sort of wrinkly old things like sexually assaulting a woman.
Yeah, that's not good.
It's not good, and this is not what that was. But I always feel a little weird about oracles now.
I always just think of Larry Ellison and his obsession with the America's Cup yacht, super yacht, or not yacht, whatever the hell they're called.
Yeah.
The race boats, the floating boats, the hover boats.
Yeah. I mean, other than that, like the oracle, the thing that is interesting is the oracle's like, yeah, like my mom like didn't sleep around, but my mom jumped from like relationship to relationship. She couldn't stick around. Like, for better or for worse, the oracle's just a normal guy. Like,
yeah, who had like a tough childhood.
Yeah, like a tough childhood, but in the grand scheme of, I will say, like Scottish, Irish, English literature, like you think about oh my God, Frank McCourt's Angela's Ashes, like that. It's like, you know, the oracle ended up with a guy in finance, 6'5", blue eyes, finance. But like that just, yeah, it seems very like that's like the average state of the world at that time. And this guy, the oracle, came from that. So it's like this, you know, oracle, which is a title, this magnificent title and supposedly magnificent, omniscient definition of what you are and what your role is. And he's just a guy.
I'm curious now, and I'm not, nothing's, oh God, this is the longest article ever. I was trying to see if the oracle's story, like their backstory of like their family and like how they get there, if that's a reference to another Scottish work of literature. Like if that's meant to, I don't know, it's not anything obvious to me, but like I'll look through this like 40-page academic article on it that popped up, that maybe there is, but like that wouldn't shock me, but it doesn't mean anything if it is or it isn't. It's just like occurred to me now as you were saying that maybe it was like a nod to blank that he's incorporating in certain, like the farmer element, that becomes like the wealthy businessman obsessed with numbers. That if you were to tell me that's a character from X book, I'd be like, oh, okay, that tracks. That's cool then. But I think the oracle too, like it does one of the things that Gray does, and I don't know where Poor Things is in here, but one of the things about Poor Things in particular is that everything always deals with like who is telling the story and how the story is being told. So like a vast part of Poor Things is told through letters, like an epistolary novel, and then through Bella's own like writing, which is like is crazy at first and becomes more logical as she learns via her like her, you know, the story of Poor Things is that a woman who's pregnant drowns herself, and the baby lives, and so they implant the baby's brain into the woman, and so she has the brain of a child but a body of an adult female, and like that discordance as she learns, and like what the role of women is within society and their freedoms, their non-freedoms come through in that bit. But like the fact of like how the story is told, how is information portrayed, from what point of view is it coming, is something that's like kind of key. And even though this beginning section is like they're all like kind of objective, like third person, whatever, blanking on words, but they are tight like that. But at the same time, like the second that there's a chance for someone to tell something, they do. So like he writes this story, the oracle is going to dictate things. There's like a frame of like where this information is coming from that sort of like you can ignore in most books, but to Gray it seems to be something that he's kind of interested in as like
absolutely. There's a lot of book reading and a lot of storytelling, like Lanark reading to Rima the dragon, and then the oracle is telling the prologue, and at the end Rima like cuddles up and is like, yes, go on, like more story.
more story.
And it's like, it's nice, and it's kind of, Can we move on to book one?
Yeah, I want to make one joke though. Is that at the
Okay.
beginning I was trying to think of a phrase to joke to use at the start of this. I was gonna say the only books podcast obsessed with dragons and oracles, but then I was like, nope, that's like fucking what is that show? Game of Thrones. There's a million books
House of
podcasts
Dragons, whatever. Yeah,
House of Dragon and that nonsense.
Yeah.
No offense, George R. R. Martin, but do you not care about those shows? Yeah, book one, go for it.
Book one, I think this is telling in regard to myself, but I think there's maybe a very small percentage of people who do not enjoy hearing stories about themselves when they were little. And I mean, no, okay, like, you know, minus trauma and stuff like that, but like I think it's book one is very comfortable right now because it does have that classic, like Duncan Thaw drew a blue line along the top of a sheet of paper, blah blah blah, and it goes again in a little bit into the conformity, into the conformity of things, where he draws this, you know, giant holding a sack, and he can't draw a princess, so he just draws the sack and she's in it. And his dad's like, what are you drawing? And he's like, a miller running to the mill with a bag of corn.
Right.
This like weird, like fantasy and imagination is not allowed, even though he's a child. And I think that goes back to the conformity of things, where you're like, what's the easiest, what's the most straightforward explanation you can give without having to, like, it's a miller with a sack of flour, like, whatever, you don't have to. But there is, like,
well, related to that, his dad then replies and is basically like, why is the sky just one blue line? Is that the horizon? He's like, no, it's like the sky. And he's like, well, then he's like, gravity exists, that's why we don't float off. He's like, when you float, the sky is like, no, you float on forever because there's nothing that would be stopping you. And you're like, here are the rules.
He's like,
these are how nature works. These are the rules.
Which as a kid, you can like that definitely, and that what that implies is that this is something that happens on a regular basis. So if Duncan Thaw, his dad's like, oh, what's that? And he's like, oh, it's a dragon climbing a tree. The dad's probably like, dragons don't exist because of A, B, and C. And he's even like this. He's like, it's a miller running with a bag of flour. And the dad takes a golf ball and is like, the world is round. Like it's so much for a 5-year-old. But
I believe Kyrie Irving would inform you very strongly that the Earth is flat. There is no round. So
I've heard there's no right. Round.
Also, loser, didn't win any championships. No rings for you, Kyrie. No ships. You don't get to put that in the water.
Ships, but it's very charming. It's very charming in a very classical way, and I think it's interesting that we're 117 plus pages in, and we get this like touchstone, a place to sort of settle and maybe reset. And so I'm wondering, like, once we get a little comfortable, like, when's the other shoe gonna drop?
There's like and there is like, he references that one of the big, the influence is the Kafka influence, obviously, but also like these kind of adventure stories, like that sort of adventure nature. And this whole first chapter that introduces us to Duncan Thaw is like a traditional quest narrative. He has like no information. He goes out, he meets these older kids. They don't really want him around, but he like ends up going with them. They cross over into another part of the city that's like not his part of the city and is much more dangerous. He then becomes lost on his own, can't find his way home, falls into the water. These are like Slow of Despond, Pilgrim's Progress, like narrative tropes, and then is found and rescued by his dad. And so like the kind of hero quest sort of comes back home. He's not like accomplished anything aside from like it created his independence to some degree and like had these experiences, had this bit, and then they get bombed. And then there's like a bomb ripped through.
And the actual, like a child's narrative on the background, with the background of like the war as a brewing.
I assume World War II. The air raids.
I guess, yeah.
And the fact that like he's wearing the way that it describes the dad though, his dad like goes out. Other workmen build air raid shelters in the back greens and a very big one in the school playground. and if Thaw heard the air raid warning on the way to school, he must run to the nearest shelter. Going up to school by the steep back lane one morning, he heard the siren wailing in the blue sky. He was almost at school, but turned and ran home to where his mother waited in the back green shelter with the neighbors. At night, dark green blinds were pulled down over the windows. Then Mr. Thaw put on an armband and steel hat and went into the street to search for houses showing illegal chinks of light. This is all like the air raid sort of protocol of, not giving targets, not allowing targets, but they do get hit. So I think it's World War II, but that it might not be as realistic, but I think this section is realistic. I think this is a much more. It's clearly not like the Institute. It's clearly not like book 3.
No.
Which is the other thing I wanted to point out. So book 1 also has an image. So again, Alistair Gray has like all these drawings that go throughout his books, and this one is like much less Dante's Inferno or whatever, like the first one for book 3, but it does say there's 2 pillars. There's a guy with a sword in the background. There's ships, a boat, put like a Moby Dick looking Poseidon creature about to chow down on a boat. A couple of people at the bottom, I'm not sure who they would be. And then there's on these columns that on their bases have the words, "Let Glasgow flourish," and then "by telling the truth." So I think that's supposed to set up that this is like the truth versus the other one, which was like very much like the whole Divine Comedy of like the heaven and hell and the sort of meta whatever. And could be that, that's the afterlife. Theoretically, like the Institute and all that could be a representation of the afterlife too. It could be any number of things, but I feel like this foregrounds that this part is real. This is the truth. But then the idea of like, let Glasgow flourish goes back to what you're saying of like the imagination being shut down. The fact that like, there's been this sudden emphasis on numbers, on things that are like actual versus like the reality of touching things and of people and whatnot. There's some sort of tension there through the Oracle and then through the dad, but that there's always been this hint with Noakes and whomever else that like hope, care, charity, imagination are more valuable, like saving elements that can heal you or keep you healthy.
Yes, than like conformist practicality.
Right, and like an Elon type of a singularity.
Mm-hmm.
You can shoehorn anti-Elon stuff into anything.
The Institute is just a giant Cybertruck.
Fuck those things. Fuck
those things. I have a quick question before I forget it for the umpteenth time. How many times do you think Duncan Thaw / Coulter / Lanark has been through the Institute?
Oh, interesting. Oh, I don't know. I'm gonna say right now 1. I'm gonna say this is the first time. I'm gonna say what he's gonna land himself there rather than it's a repeating cycle. But I don't know. That's a good question. So like the idea that he's gone through it several times and this is like as if this is like just a psychotic break. Book 3 is just a psychotic break that then he comes back.
Psychotic break or like a Bardo-esque, because like on I could make an argument for this because on 121 at the very bottom where they're talking about the sky and gravity and Duncan's like, but wouldn't we come to a thing on the other side? There is no other side, Duncan, none at all, his dad says. So the dad's like, there is no other side. And that could be taken as like, no, like this is the one and only plane of existence, where the Institute disproves that. And it does sort of hint at multiple planes of potential existence. But also I can bury the seed a little bit deeper, even when the Oracle is like, oh, where do you want to start? 5, 15, or 10? You could read that as like the Oracle is like, well, these are the numbers you chose last time or in previous times. So like, where do you want to start today? And in this case, Lanark's like, 5. Like, why would I start, at the not earliest point?
I do want to stand up for that's interesting. You can see like the Bardo sort of existence, like vibe being there. I think my only like hesitation with it is I think like there's so much Catholicism and like Protestantism in like the Scottish and Anglican church that like that sort of rigorous worldview is one that I think you'd be much more like lambasting or like at least commenting on. and necessarily like a Bardo type vibe. But yeah, I think that could be totally true. I meant to say this too, that book 3 reads to me like Dahlgren by Samuel Delany. Like there is like the same sort of like this weird kind of dream logic. The place seems very specific and yet also like impossible. There's a lot of like, it reminded me very much of that when reading this last part. And if you haven't read Samuel Delany's Dahlgren, it's a brilliant book. It's a giant book. It's very weird. It's sort of like incomprehensible in certain ways if you force like it into like one pure like realistic narrative, but it really has its own logic and works wondrously well. It's like really truly a great work of science fiction. And it did seem to remind me of that, because it's like in that book it's like a city that's kind of not a city, that's also all cities, that's like this thing that has its own sort of way of functioning, and the Institute reminded me of that. I do want to stand up for Duncan Thaw though too, and say that he has good taste in food. Food is like an important metaphor here. So he doesn't want to eat humans. He doesn't want to eat the human what was it again? The elastic ice gelatin cubes. But also, her son always refused shepherd's pie or any other food whose appearance disgusted him. Spongy white tripe, soft penis like sausages, stuffed sheep's hearts with their valves and little arteries. When one of these came before him, he poked it uncertainly with his fork and said, "I don't want it." Okay.
Yeah, word.
Word.
Heard, chef.
I really want my kids to try the foods I make them and not say that everything is gross, but this shit is gross.
Yeah.
He's right. He's not wrong. Yeah, he's like, 100. Take a taste, but you hadn't tried it. Taste just a wee bit for my sake. No. Children in China are starving for food like that. Send it to them.
Yeah.
That joke reigns throughout centuries, and like it's always been there.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And I do, I mean, as someone who does have some questionable food items within their culture and upbringing. Wet meat. I don't even know, whatever, galettes. Head cheese is one that Latvians also have, which is like elastic ice with pig meat in it.
Yeah.
But I do respect Duncan Thaw's. I do respect Duncan Thaw's stance of, like, when his dad comes home too, his mom's like, "Well, you're gonna get it when dad gets home if you don't eat this." And he's just basically like, and his dad comes home and is like, "Why are you making your mom upset? You need to eat this food or else." And Duncan Thaw's like, or else, man. Like, I'll take the spanking. Like, I'm not touching that.
But then he does start eating all the shepherd's pie and whatnot.
Well, shepherd's pie isn't it just like
isn't like just mashed stuff, like
pot pie?
Yeah, pot pie.
Like, which seems totally normal. That seems like the least offensive of all the things. It's not haggis, but I do respect that of the kid just being like, absolutely not. Mm-hmm. I would rather get thrashed than eat that, because that's how I felt with some of these foods when I was little too. I was like, nope.
Yep. So yeah, I mean, he does eat the shepherd's pie, and it does still sound gross. He stared at the mushy potato with particles of carrot, cabbage, and mince in it, and wondered if brains really looked like that. Like, it's still not described in an appealing way. But any last thoughts? We should probably wrap this up. I have my line of the week ready to go.
I have my line of the week as well. No, this is one where I didn't want to talk about it last night because it is a book that so far I need to sit with it for a little bit. I don't have any instant reactions except for like lines here or there. So it's definitely fun for that, because it is I think you do need to think about it.
Yeah, and I like that, and I agree with that, and I think that's one of the things that makes it an interesting book. I was saying too that it reads fast. It reads fast, but it doesn't read fast. It reads faster than praiseworthy, which is like just banging at you, like through your eyes constantly into your brain, like pound, pound, pound. This at least has something is different than that, and like has a compellingness to reading it that we could talk about in later weeks in terms of the style. Mm-hmm. So for next week, we do go through page 186. So 189 through chapter 18, which is almost the end of book 1. So getting through most of that next week. And then we will be off on July 4th, but we'll talk about that next week. So for up to 180 through 189 for next week, my line of the week, while you're on mute, is from page 116. And this is the Oracle talking again. He says, I'll read the whole thing, but the last line is the one that the last two lines are the ones I like the best. Having relived these memories, I saw that the path from the sunlit roses to the gray void had been inevitable, yet I was not content. I was appalled at having nothing to do or remember a life like that. Then these are lines I like. I wanted madness to blot out the memories with the strong tones and colors of a delusion, however monstrous. I had a romantic notion that madness was an exit from unbearable existence.
Mm-hmm.
Those two are my line of the week.
Yeah. I underlined the line right after that, but madness is like cancer or bronchitis. Not everyone is capable of it.
Yeah.
And when most of us say, I can't bear this, we are proving we can.
It's also quite funny. Like,
yeah.
You can't, not everyone can get cancer. Not everyone can get mad. Not everyone can go crazy.
Not everyone can handle it. Yeah. My lines are on 88, the second half. It's where he's back in the cafeteria for the staff club and he's sitting at his table. And then Lanark went to a table in the farthest corner and was approached by a waitress. And these are the lines I like. He said, "Have you anything brown, dry, and crumbly?" "No, sir, but we've something pink, moist, and crumbly." And that's just... and those are it, yeah. Like we have 1 out of 3 of that.
Yeah, exactly. So funny. Love it. So up to 189 for next week. And no final thoughts here either, but if you're watching, subscribe, like us, give us ratings on the Apple Podcasts or Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts from, and tune in next week. Brian should be back. We'll have like banter about all of these things. Maybe we'll play a game, but we'll definitely talk about the style and about the readability of this book in contrast to some of the others, and what you're sort of hinting at, that it's like a book you have to kind of sit with and think about, and how that impacts the whole nature of this program. So till then, I'm out of here. Have a good week, everyone, and we'll be back.